I still remember the scent of her perfume mixing with the lilies in the hallway, the exact moment my life split in two. I was supposed to be the happiest man alive, minutes away from marrying the love of my life. Instead, I opened a door that led straight into hell. There she was, the woman I was about to call my wife, sandwiched between my best friend and another groomsman, like the universe decided to show me the definition of betrayal in 4K resolution. When she saw me, she screamed, "You're not supposed to see the bride before the ceremony." As if that was the issue. My body went numb, my mind silent. Then, something inside me snapped, not in rage, but in perfect, surgical coldness. Because at that moment, I knew two things. 1, the wedding was off. 2, no one in that room would ever forget what I was about to do next. The morning had started like a dream. The venue was glowing in soft sunlight, the decorators running around setting up white flowers and satin ribbons. Everyone was smiling. I had spent months planning every tiny detail, the kind of perfection only someone deeply in love would chase. But love, it blinds you. It turns red flags into rose petals. I was staying in a separate room at the resort, as per tradition. My groomsmen, including my best friend since childhood, had crashed with me the night before. We'd laughed, drank, and talked about how surreal it all felt. He'd even given me a small box, saying, "For your new life, brother." Inside was a silver keychain engraved with our initials, his and mine. I thought it was sentimental. I didn't realize it was symbolic of the key he already had to the woman I loved. By noon, the makeup team had taken over her suite. My mom had texted, "She looks stunning. You're a lucky man." I believed her. Then came the forgotten cufflinks. My late father's, a family heirloom. They were in the same bag my fiancée had taken earlier that morning, insisting she'd keep them safe. I didn't think twice. I took the master key from the front desk and walked toward her room. I wasn't prepared for what I'd hear before I even reached the door. There's a sound that kills innocence. It's not loud, not even dramatic. It's a moan that sounds too real to mistake. At first, I froze, thinking maybe I was hearing wrong. But when I heard two male voices, laughing, followed by a gasp and a thud, my brain started piecing it together faster than I wanted. My heart was pounding. I opened the door. And there she was. White lingerie, veil halfway off her head. My best friend behind her. Another groomsman in front. The same hands that were supposed to hold my future were gripping someone else's body in my bed, the one I had decorated for our honeymoon night. For a few seconds, everything stopped. The world dimmed, and I could only hear my own breathing. Then, as if on cue, she screamed, not in guilt, not even in shame, but in anger. "Get out. You're not supposed to see the bride before the ceremony." That line still echoes in my skull. The audacity, the entitlement, the insanity. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I just looked at her. Then looked at him. And then at the mirror beside them, cracked slightly from their movement, reflecting the three of them in a grotesque parody of love. She scrambled for a sheet. He tried to speak. But I just smiled. I said, "Don't worry. You'll never have to see me again after today." And I meant it. I walked toward her dresser, found the engagement ring box, opened it, and slowly pulled the ring off her finger. She tried to stop me, but my hand was faster. The slap that followed wasn't out of rage, it was punctuation. Cold, clean, and final. She stumbled backward, clutching her face, and I whispered, "You'll remember this sound every time someone says my name." Then I picked up my cufflinks, turned around, and walked out, calm as ice. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, I was already gone. I left the venue, the city, and the life I had built for 5 years, all within 30 minutes. No explanation. No goodbye. The best man, or should I say, ex-best friend, called me repeatedly. I didn't answer. My mother left a dozen voicemails, crying, confused. My fiancé texted me paragraphs of apologies that read more like scripts from a bad soap opera. Then silence. 3 days later, the wedding venue refunded half the payment, citing unforeseen cancellation. My phone was filled with screenshots, gossip threads, and memes. Apparently, one of the staff had leaked photos from that day. My humiliation had gone viral. But I wasn't broken. I was plotting. Because when you take everything from a man who built his life around you, you create something far more dangerous than anger, you create patience. A month later, I returned to the city, quietly. I didn't contact anyone. Instead, I started following their lives from a distance. They thought I was gone forever, maybe even dead. The fiancée had posted pictures of herself healing on Instagram, spa trips, motivational quotes, fake smiles. My best friend had switched jobs, joined a new firm, and was now living with her. Perfect. I spent nights mapping out what would destroy them the same way they destroyed me, not physically, not legally, but socially, emotionally, and financially. They had shared secrets with me, dark ones. Her hidden debts, his workplace misconduct, the fact that they had used wedding funds for their private trips months before. I collected every receipt, every chat backup, every screenshot. Then, with a few anonymous emails, I started the domino effect. Her loan company suddenly received proof of her hidden income. His company's HR got a report about his inappropriate behavior with a subordinate, including pictures. I didn't need to show my face. My fingerprints were invisible. By the time they realized what hit them, she had lost her job, and he was suspended. But here's where it gets dark. Because my plan didn't stop with them. I found out something else, something that even they didn't know. She wasn't just cheating on me with them. She'd been part of something much bigger, a secret arrangement club where brides-to-be explored, final flings, before weddings, organized by none other than his ex-girlfriend. So, I joined the club. Not as myself, as someone new. And I made sure every single one of them would meet their downfall, one wedding at a time. Because my story didn't end with betrayal. It began there. I came back for the cleanup. That's what I called it at first, as if I were scrubbing dirt off a floor. But cleaning implies making something pure again. What I learned, slowly and then all at once, was that you can't scrub away betrayal. You can only rearrange it until it looks like something else. When I told you I joined the club, I meant it. I didn't just poke my head in, I built a new face and lived inside it. A different name. A different job. A different laugh. If confessions were currency, I traded mine for a passport to the room where brides-to-be bought their secrets back before the altar. I learned their language fast. They called the gatherings last roars, goodbye favors, freedom nights, anything to make the final sin sound celebratory. Men paid for access. Women paid with trust. The organizer, a woman who wore cruelty like perfume, moved between them with a ledger and a smile. She knew how to cloak arrangement and consent, how to whisper, "No one's watching," and make everybody believe it. At first, I watched. I listened. I let them brag about who they were going to ruin, who they'd already ruined, the hush money they'd taken, the lies they'd perfected. I saved screenshots. I copied numbers. I let them think I was one of them, amused, detached, inexperienced but curious. I wanted them to keep their guard down. They did. The fiancée, I'll keep calling her that because she made that name ugly enough, had a natural arrogance. She thought she was a player. She bragged about the groom she'd replaced and the ways she'd made men bend. My best friend laughed at the same jokes as before, the way he always had, only now the jokes were about how easy it was to get away with it. They treated me like background noise. Perfect. If you're reading this and thinking I went too far, remember, at the start of this, I was a man who had watched the person who promised to keep his promises kneel on his bed for two strangers and clap her hands when the camera flashed. There's a noise that happens inside you at that moment, a hollowing, like someone scooped out soft fruit and left you with a shell. I learned that hollowness can be trained. It began small. An anonymous email here, a printed invoice there. I made sure her creditors knew she'd lied about income. I left a few copies of evidence where men who value reputation would find them. Her followers dwindled. She posted apologies that read like scripts. He had to explain his absence from work. He had to answer questions that used to feel like whispers and suddenly became sirens. They stumbled. They fell. They tried to crawl out. That was the point I'd been waiting for, watching their panic, the neat little unraveling that comes when someone finds the seams in a stitched life. But revenge, as I designed it, wasn't meant to be immediate. It was surgical. You don't kill a man with one strike if you're trying to remove his soul. You make him watch his own reflection break. That's when things changed. The organizer, the woman who'd built the club into a profitable, insular machine, noticed me. Maybe she saw a difference in the way I listened, maybe she just liked the way I laughed at her jokes, but she started to talk to me. She offered me opportunities, bigger parties, more exclusive groups, introductions. My undercover life suddenly had a ladder. I climbed. The ladder put me closer to her ledger, to raw names, to the finances. I began to see that the club was a parasite that fed off final flings and left ruined marriages behind. I also discovered something else, something uglier than I expected. The organizer had a private list. It wasn't only brides who bought freedom nights. Men, she confessed once over wine, sometimes wanted to watch their partners get it out of their system. Others wanted to punish. A few wanted blackmail material. The organizer sold all of it. I kept thinking, she's the cancer. Remove her, and perhaps the rest will wither. It's funny, the mind rationalizes like a lawyer with a conscience. I told myself I would expose her ledger and let justice be the blade. I told myself I would send everything to the press, to the police, to the husbands and wives who deserved the truth. But then the ledger showed me something I hadn't considered: not everyone on that list deserved to be publicly crucified. Some had fragile lives. Some were victims of their own loneliness. The ledger was a map of human ruin, not a script for redemption. So I changed tactics again. If I couldn't burn everything down without burning innocence, I'd choose specific fires. I'd be surgical, precise. My plan, spread out over months, had 3 acts: humiliation, isolation, and finally, the final play. Humiliation I'd already started. Isolation came next. I whispered into ears, forged texts that made them doubt each other, made him suspicious of her late-night meetings, made her question whether he really loved her in a way that invited her to make the predictable choices. I watched relationships collapse under the weight of their own secrets. It was ugly and effective. Then came the final play. You need to understand the psychology of people like them. They wanted proof of escape more than anything. They wanted something they could consume and forget. So the organizer set up a private ceremony that she promised would be unforgettable, an arranged night with 3 participants, filmed, with a promise of complete anonymity. She sold it as an art project. They bought it. I volunteered. Not to be part of the act, but to be the cameraman. No, not that. I was the tech person, the guy who set up the encryption, the one who handled the files. I put myself in the middle because I wanted to know what they valued. I wanted to have the power to move the files like pieces on a board. On the night of the ceremony, I turned the machines on and recorded. I put a second device in a drawer where I had smuggled a tiny recorder. I recorded not for blackmail but for legal leverage, should I ever need it. Their faces, their voices, the casual cruelty, it all went into my vault. Then I waited. The organizer got greedy. She thought she could monetize more, sell private clips to those who wanted to watch but didn't want participation. Her hubris was sloppy. She left her email open on a shared computer. She trusted the wrong person at the wrong time. I exploited that. I forwarded copies of carefully chosen files to people who made enemies and to people who would never forgive betrayal. A politician lost out. A foundation rescinded a bracket. A father refused to walk his daughter down the aisle. Chaos blossomed, and slowly, the organizer's income hemorrhaged. But what I did not expect was the way she reacted. She called me in that low, late-night tone that meant she wanted to talk business. I met her at a cafe that smelled of burnt coffee and wet coats. She was smaller without her armor, but the eyes, God, the eyes, were the same blade. "You're good," she said. I wondered how long you'd play. I told her nothing. She slid a cup across the table and put down a small envelope. The corners were square, the paper expensive. Inside were photographs, old ones of me, at college, at my father's funeral, with my ex who had taught me how to lie to be loved. She had dug into my past, threaded it like a noose, and set it under my nose. For a man who likes to clean, she smiled, "You leave a lot of footprints." That smile was the first time I felt fear. I had always imagined myself a step ahead, but she had feet the way a spider has legs, everywhere. She knew things. She knew more. And she wanted me to pay. She made a proposal: work for her. Help organize, help recruit, and in return, she'd protect whatever skeletons I had. If I refused, she'd publish everything. Not just the ledger. Not just the clips. My life, my family's life, small and shreddable, would become a lesson. That's when the hollowness returned, sharper. I realized I wasn't cleaning anymore. I was being pressed into shape by someone who could snap me like a twig. I said no. She laughed. "Pride's expensive," she said. "Enjoy your righteous morality." Then she left the cafe and walked into the rain like she was stepping in slow motion toward her own theater. That night I sat in my car and thought about things I'd never thought about before. I thought about the ending I wanted and the cost of getting there. She had my past and my future trapped in that envelope. She had leverage. To destroy her would mean risking everything. To let her live was to be her puppet. At some point during that long, cold hour, the line of demarcation in my mind blurred. I used to imagine revenge as punishment. It had become survival. 2 days later she was dead. There's no graceful way to say it. Her body was found at the base of an old building 2 blocks from the club's old location. The press called it a tragic accident. The police called it a fall. The people who ran in those circles began muttering about broken ladders and bad timing. I watched the news and let the world interpret it however it wanted. I did not tell anyone that I had followed her that night. I did not tell anyone that we had argued near the back alley where the city keeps its dumpsters and its secrets. I did not tell anyone that when her hands reached for my jacket, I tried to pull away and she slipped. I did not tell anyone that for the first time in months, I felt an animal part of me, the one that had lived a softer life, go silent. Because here's the thing the movies don't show you, murder isn't a movie spark. It's a hollowing, followed by a weight. It fills the place where rage and righteousness used to live. Some part of me wanted to say I acted in self-defense, or that an accident happened. But the truth is uglier. I let the argument go on longer than I should have. I stepped in ways I didn't need to. The city took her life, and I took my breaths afterward as if they belonged to someone else. The police opened an investigation. Papers printed that she'd been seen arguing with a male in a dark coat. Witnesses were fuzzy, contradicted themselves. The ledger was lost in the scramble, copies were destroyed. People scattered. Who did the world blame? Not me. Not at first. The organizer had enemies. Someone needed closure and a face. Their eyes fell on the fiancé and my best friend. Why? Because they had motive on paper, scandal, greed, revenge. They had the kind of footprints police like, the kind that make neat narratives. My fingerprints were not on the bricks, the same way my footsteps had been sanded smooth by something I told myself was necessity. They were arrested. It was theatrical, almost elegant in its cruelty. I watched them lead my best friend away in handcuffs and felt no triumph. The hollowness isn't the same as victory. It's a corridor of echoing choices. My fiancé cried in front of cameras and called it a setup, the world hearing the sound of someone trying to stitch their life back together from rags. The evidence was stacked like an accusation, messages showing them angry with the organizer, surveillance footage placing them near the area that night, planted by the staff, and the ledger. Someone had found a copy and left it on the precinct chief's desk with a note, belligerent lovers and their deaths. The police loved a tidy story. The press loved a moral. The public loved a spectacle. They were indicted. I went to the courthouse and sat in the back and watched my former best friend, the boy who once taught me to count to 10 on windy nights, try to explain how he'd been framed. My fiancé looked at me from the gallery with a face that asked for rescue. I did not stand. I could not. Sometimes I think the worst part wasn't their faces behind glass or the metal that framed their wrists, it was the sound of the judge calling the case, the way my name fluttered like a moth over their lives. People whispered. Strangers stared. Friends turned away. After the arraignment, a reporter found me outside. He wanted a statement. He wanted the why. I gave him a line, shallow, unfeeling, I want the truth. I didn't tell him what I knew. I didn't tell him what I'd done. I had become an architect of someone else's ruin, and I was building the scaffolding with hands that had once tied my own shoes. Months passed. Trials are slow things. Evidence is re-examined. The world forgets and remembers in cycles. Their trials were messy, a parade of contradictions and retractions. At one point, the prosecution's star witness admitted they'd been paid to identify the two as the last seen arguing with the organizer. The defense called it a setup. The press called it a circus. But the ledger existed. And whoever had the right parts of the record still whispered deep truths to the right people. The jury, composed of people with their own lives to protect, found them guilty. When the verdict came, my body registered it as a physical blow. They were sentenced, not to death, not to a cold cell for decades, but to enough time that their reputations would never fully resurrect. Their families called it cruelty. The internet called it justice. I called it a life sentence measured in quiet rooms. And the twist, the part that crawls under my skin when I'm alone, is that I could have stopped it. I had the files. I had the recorder's raw tracks. I had proof of how the organizer twisted stories and fed people lies. I had the night's footage that showed the organizer leaving, alive, well, having taken her own steps toward the ledge minutes later. I could have cleared them. I chose not to. Why? Here's the truth, ugly and raw, I was tired of being a victim. I wanted them to feel what I felt. I didn't just want punishment. I wanted ownership. When they asked for mercy, the part of me that had been hollowed looked at their faces and saw the same thing I saw that day in her room, indifference. That indifference took a shape in me that wasn't revenge anymore, it was hunger. After the trial, life kept moving in the city. People congratulated me for being strong, for leaving. My mother still called. My phone filled with messages from strangers who had watched the headlines and thought they knew the entire script. I answered some, ignored many. There's a kind of loneliness that comes when you're surrounded by people who think your story is a parable. The final twist is personal and small and perfectly monstrous. I took the organizer's place. Not publicly. Not with a ledger or a title. But the club needed structure, and someone had to fill the gap. The members bickered and squabbled, but without leadership their world fractured. They needed a shepherd. I became that shepherd. I told myself I would do it to keep it safe. I told myself I'd use it to stop the worst of the harms. I told myself the same kinds of lies I used to tell the man in the mirror when I was a boy who wanted to be loved. And I was good at it. I learned how to take the ledger and make it less lethal. I learned to filter the worst offers. I learned to remove the predators who thought the club was a hunting ground. I thought that made me better. I told myself I was a reformation. But there's a difference between correcting and controlling. Somewhere along the way I began to measure power not in what I stopped but in how many people I could make tremble. The ledger became my tool. I could give people the freedom to do terrible things, or I could turn the page and ruin them. Control felt like warmth after a long winter. The organizer's old perfume is still there sometimes on the suits I wear. Sometimes I wake up and smell it and my throat tightens. If this confession reads like a cry for absolution, it isn't. I am not absolved. I am not sorry in the ways you want. I am sorry in the quiet, private ways that mean nothing to anyone else. The last thing I will admit, the part one have never told anyone, is the cruelest twist of all. I learned that I liked being the man who held other people's endings. The power was a drug. It tasted like control, like the beat of a heart slowing to match mine. I watched them from my office window sometimes, couples I had saved and couples I had ruined, and realized the line between savior and villain is a thread you can knit into either a noose or a scarf. People ask me if I miss her, the woman who was supposed to be my wife, the one who turned my life into a field of landmines. The answer is complicated. I miss the idea of her, the life we talked about and planned and photographed. I do not miss the betrayal. I do not miss the girl who laughed while the world watched. So here I am, confessing in a forum that feels like a confessional booth because anonymity makes honesty easier to swallow. I am the man who walked in and found a life broken into pieces. I am also the man who, after watching, became what I hunted. I cleaned and rearranged and burned and built. I destroyed and protected and lied. If there's a moral here, it's that revenge is a mirror that only ever reflects you. It will show you the face you have chosen in the dark. My face looks different now. It is precise. It is available. It is colder. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had stayed. If I had dropped to my knees and begged, or forgiven, or laughed, anything but the things I did. Would we have been happier? Would I still be the same man? I don't know. I never will. The last line of my story is not clean. It's not dramatic. The organizer's old ledger sits in a locked safe. Sometimes I open it and read lines that make me smile with relief and others that make me feel like I swallowed a stone. Outside, somewhere in the city, my ex-fiancée and my former best friend are rebuilding the parts of themselves that aren't mine to fix. And me? I run a club that used to be a den. I keep the ledger and decide who gets to keep their life and who gets the kind of public unspooling that makes people disappear. Do I deserve forgiveness? I don't know. Do you? Neither do I. If you came to this for schadenfreude, the joy of watching cheaters get their comeuppance, remember, the man holding the strings is still human. He just wears his scars like medals and, sometimes, like chains. This is my confession. I wrote it because the hollow inside me needed to be filled with words. It will not undo anything. It will not bring anyone back. But maybe, if you're listening closely, you'll hear the echo of a man who lost himself trying to find justice and instead found a taste for control that never goes away.